Anniversaries make memories, and people should think about, whether you want to or not, right? Whether you care about it or whether you don't. People will remember where they were in 2026 at the 250th. So think about the memory that you want to make, the baton pass that you want to offer to the person who's young enough that they'll get another crack at this in 2076. This is a patriotic occasion, and patriotism means many things. Find yours. Whether it's the UFC fight on the White House lawn, or whether it's a parade in your hometown, think about what belonging to the nation means to you and act on it, because otherwise somebody else will define your patriotism.
Welcome to the Going Big podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gentry, and this is the place where we celebrate bold moves and big ideas. Each week, I sit down with inspiring leaders, entrepreneurs, and change makers who are making a significant impact in their careers and in their communities. Whether you're looking to level up your leadership, pursue your passion, or just get inspired to take your next big leap, this is where those stories come to life. Now, if you're listening on iTunes, YouTube, or anywhere else you tune into podcasts, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. Now, let's dive in to what it means to truly go big.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Going Big podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gentry. As America approaches the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, we want to take a deeper look into these ideas, the people behind them, and the exceptional acts of courage that brought them about. There are few documents in human history that have had the influence and impact, the consequential impact, as the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson and the founders, in just a few pages, put forward statements about liberty and rights and self-determination and equality and human endeavors, human dignity in such a way that has profoundly affected not only the United States, but people around the world. But our question today was, who exactly was Thomas Jefferson? How did all this come about? What influenced him? How did this sort of motley crew of founders, many of them who disagreed with one another, who were flawed, who were anxious about what they're doing, come up with something that has lasted 250 years? Well, to help us answer this, we're really privileged to have Dr. Jane Kamensky, who is the president and CEO of Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, and one of the most well-known American historians on the early days of our country. You may remember her from Ken Burns' documentary, The American Revolution. Dr. Kamensky, it's great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us on the Going Big podcast.
Thanks for asking me, Kevin. I'm thrilled to be here.
All right. Well, here's my leadoff question. What do you think that people most misunderstand about Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence?
So I'll give you one answer about Jefferson in particular, and then another about everybody who you see in that famous Trumbull painting standing to sign. The thing that I think no one realizes about Jefferson picking up the pen to draft the Declaration is he didn't want the job, right? This was not an assignment that people were desperately raising their hands for. Jefferson was involved in a lot of committee work at the Second Continental Congress in the spring of 1776. And he actually thought that writing the Constitution for the Commonwealth of Virginia, a new state constitution, was, as a matter of government, the most important thing he could be doing. So stepping into what turned out in retrospect to be very, very big boots was not something he was especially eager for at that moment. And I think it matters to remember the Declaration as something that was foisted on his primary author rather than something that people were desperate to get to the front of the line to do. And that leads me to a point about all 56 men who eventually signed the Declaration, never on one day as Trumbull painted, but straggling in over the course of July. Most had signed by August 2nd of 1776. We think of them as old. And that's partly because Trumbull remembered them with white powdered periwigs. But they were young men. Congress on average was less than 40. And Jefferson was just 33 years old at the time that he wrote the Declaration. So a reminder that young people in the sort of early flower of adulthood and career, did incredible things to shape this country. And we shouldn't look back at them as if they did this when they were already made of marble.
Well, so much to cover here, but I want to follow up immediately on. He's 33. It was a committee of five that was tapped to write this. Franklin was one, if I can remember from the painting, and John Adams. I can't remember the others. How did he get tasked, though, with the actual writing assignment? Was he a good writer?
He's a great writer, and that is part of the answer to why. Franklin is the senior statesman in the committee, and John Adams is the most avid proponent of independency, as he calls it, which he refers to in March of 1776 as an hobgoblin of so frightful a mien that it would terrify somebody to look it in the face. Adams is for independence before Thomas Paine writes Common Sense. He's thrilled that Thomas Paine sort of broke through the public opinion logjam in January of 1776. But Adams knows two things, one about his position and one about himself. So coming from Massachusetts, which has been the instigator of all this trouble, the job of Massachusetts for a 2-year period has been to make the cause of Boston and the cause of New England the common cause of all. And New England had a lot of help in that from the miscalculations of George III, right? George III showed in the punishing of Boston after its so-called Tea Party that anybody in the British colonies could suffer in a similar way. But generalizing the work of independence, not leaving it stuck in New England, is important. And so that's the general reason Adams knows that he should not take the pen, even though he's a desperate to get to the front of the line guy. The second is he knows he's personally disliked. He is, as he says about himself, obnoxious. And so if he's right about where Congress stands in June of 1776, when they take up this work, about a third committed for independence, about a third pretty firmly opposed, thinks it's folly, and then a third in the middle trying to figure out what's safe, what's prudent for themselves, their family, their sacred honor, right? So he knows he's going to have to persuade 2/3 of Congress, and he is not a persuasive individual. So he makes the same kinds of calculations our legislators do today. Who is likeliest to be able to get this bill across? And Jefferson has a notable fluency of written expression, not of oral expression. He rarely speaks at all. One of the first things that Adams says about him in Congress is he's a great rubber off of dust, meaning he has no respect for encrusted tradition, but he's also very quiet. Adams later says, I never heard him say 3 sentences together. So Jefferson has sort of kept his own counsel. He's valued for his fluency of expression in a pamphlet he wrote the year before, the Summary View of British Rights. And then he's a Virginian. And next to Massachusetts, Virginia is the most politically prominent colony among the rebellious 13. It's a much more economically valuable colony than pretty much anywhere else on the mainland. So a Virginian needs to lead the charge, and those are the roads that lead to Jefferson. He doesn't lobby for himself.
Well, thank you for bringing this to life in this manner, which so easily gets lost. So just to make sure I understand this fully, from a strategic standpoint, I guess what you're saying is, if it had been just a regional Boston Sons of Liberty thing, there's no way they could have beaten the British Empire. They had to bring all of the colonies on board. So some of them, I guess Sam Adams also suppressed their ego and said, look, in order for this to look like a bigger thing, we need to have people like Jefferson and Washington and Madison and others more prominent.
They decide that it has to be unanimous, and the British colonies along the eastern seaboard and sometimes Caribbean colonies too have joined in congresses of various kinds since the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act is the first time in 1765 that people from different commonwealths, we might think of them as different republics, right? There's an old saw that at the time of the first Continental Congress, more of these gentlemen have been to London than have been to any other colony, especially Philadelphia. So they're not yet a common cloth, a common cause. They're not what the Declaration comes to call one people. And exactly so, if it's going to be a generalized cause, which is the only way they can make a serious go at winning this thing, then the first constituency they need to get through is Congress, right? They need to persuade those people in the middle. And maybe some of those, maybe all of those who think it's a terrible idea not to just keep trying to reform the empire, but to say, no, we are in the history of the world, one people dissolving the political bands which have connected them with another, as the Declaration puts it. And so you want that statement to have come from the most powerful constituencies in Congress, and Massachusetts has been a leader. They're powerful in that they were first, but into the fall of 1774 and 1775, delegates from other colonies are writing home saying, "I promise it's not just about Massachusetts." Right? Massachusetts is a kind of sore thumb. So Adams knows, and it's wonderful to be, as my colleague Danielle Allen has recently written in that In Pursuit series, it's wonderful to be the kind of leader who knows when you need to give up power to gain more. So if it's going to get through Congress, it's going to be a Virginian. And then if it's going to have the backing of the American people who are being called into being by this declaration, it needs to have the unanimity of Congress.
Okay. Well, I want to obviously get into the Declaration and so much about the consequential nature of it. But this now begs another question for me about sort of political strategy. Last year, on the 250th anniversary of Patrick Henry's Liberty or Death speech, we had a Going Big podcast episode devoted to that and the speech, or the whole thing at St. John's Church in Richmond. I didn't realize fully, but it was a similar situation that when the Virginia, the 100 and roughly 20, 25 people, that they were roughly divided similarly. A third, like Washington and Jefferson and others, were ready to go. Certainly Patrick Henry. A third were very much against because they for whatever reason, they enjoyed what they had with Great Britain. And there were a third in the middle. And Patrick Henry was aiming his remarks at that group in the middle in order to win a majority to support his calls for raising a militia. But back then, was Jefferson already clearly on board with, guys, we got to move ahead. We got to do something?
When Jefferson publishes the Summary View of the Rights of British Americans in 1774, it is the most radical statement of colonial distinction that has been made to date. He sees he himself has an ancient British lineage. He sees part of what is distinctive about British Americans as being their Anglo-Saxon heritage, and he has a sort of long genealogical theory about the kind of metal that that heritage gives British Americans that Britons in the home islands have sort of lost or let go fallow. But he is pretty down for whatever is in the more radical interest of rebellious colonists. In 1774, it's still a rebellion. It's still an insurrection, right? I think people are not thinking about a future nation. I remember a student of mine when I was in the classroom looked at the famous Copley painting of John Hancock, where he's sitting with a merchant's ledger in 1765 and said, oh, look, he's practicing his signature for the Declaration of Independence in 11 years. And of course, time doesn't work that way, right? They're not anticipating independence in 1774 or even before Concord and Lexington in 1775. The thing to remember about the Loyalists and the Neutrals, who at the time are called things like the flexibles, not a compliment, is that they have sanity on their side, right? As the Declaration puts it, mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So it's not that they think they have it great. It's that they think they have a lesser evil with the one that they know than with something that can't be imagined. And so persuasion is a part of the deal all the way along. For Washington, it's persuasion battle by battle, even to hang in the thing. Of course, the Declaration Committee in June and early July of 1776 is engaged in the art of persuasion.
Okay. Dr. Jane Kamensky, you are an esteemed historian, well known in this particular space. This is the Going Big podcast. Is the Declaration of Independence the most consequential document ever conceived, ever composed in history? How big is it in the whole big picture of our existence?
I think it has become one of the most consequential human utterances since the New Testament, right? Like nations around the world, people who are fighting to throw off chains within their countries as well as between their countries and a colonial or imperial oppressor, have taken it up hundreds of times over the course of the last nearly 2.5 centuries. Jefferson says, I think in the 1790s, we can already see the ball of liberty rolling around the world in the form of the Declaration. In July of 1776, they know that they have committed a profoundly consequential act for themselves and their families, right? When they say we've pledged our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, they mean that, right? They mean that they could hang. They mean that if this insurrection is put down, even if they escape with their lives, they will lose all their property. They will lose their stature in community. But what they don't know in 1776 is that it's a world historical event. Circling back to where we started and Jefferson not wanting the job, nobody is handing him the pen saying, you might be uttering the most consequential words since Jesus Christ. They say, we've got a job of work that we need to get done. And that is listing all the causes for this thing in a way that persuades our colleagues and that they can use to persuade the folks back home. And let facts be submitted to a candid world. That candid world is France and Spain and the Netherlands and anybody else who might want a piece of a chance to go against Britain. So they have a job of persuasion to do. I think the fascinating question for historians and for us here as interpreters at Thomas Jefferson's home and plantation, Monticello, is why have that vision statement at all, right? There's the first part is, this is what this document is. We're going to tell you what we need to do. The longest part is why, right?
And that's the list of grievances.
Our list of grievances. Right? And then the concluding part is this knows what we're going to cost. This is what we've set up and it knows what we're going to cost. Why have this vision statement, this 260-word vision statement, which I've joked with my colleagues is like one of those in this house we believe signs. Here at Monticello, we are actually turning it into in this house we believe signs that say, in this house we believe that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, etc. Why have that statement of the principles of this one people? It's actually not needed to accomplish the job of work in the document. And that I'm not original in referring to as the vision statement of the United States. It's our ceiling at Monticello. We think about it as our dome because that's the sort of signal architectural cap of Jefferson's house. And that's what's there for liberation movement after liberation movement to aspire to through the centuries, right? Starting in Latin America and extending through Europe, the Caribbean islands, all of the places that decolonized from the British and French empires in the 20th century, from Vietnam to Palestine to Harvey Milk, right? All quote the Declaration because these words are so transcendent. That's what makes it living text, where it could be just another congressional committee report that accomplishes its job. We don't often refer to pieces of congressional legislation as transcendent. Jefferson inserts, and the committee helps him revise that initial preamble into something that is truly transcendent.
Well, so in your judgment, these are great insights. In your judgment, is that transcendency in the vision statement, in the beginning, what makes it so revolutionary? Or is it the words themselves as such a departure? I mean, a few minutes ago, you were talking about how different the world was in so many ways, and you could just resign yourself to that. I love to refer to Thomas Hobbes' point about how for most of humanity, life has been nasty, brutish, and short. And so this is suddenly just totally new. Is that what makes it revolutionary? What is it that makes it so explosive?
There's this great exchange in the 1820s where, Adams has lived through the ascendancy of Jefferson and his own erasure in some ways from the public mind, and he's peevish about this. He's a sort of peevish fellow, and he writes to a friend and says, people give Jefferson all this credit for this thing, and there's nothing original in it. And Jefferson writes another letter saying, yeah, there's nothing original in it. That's the whole point, right? These are human aspirations, that he had not picked up a book, that he had aimed neither at originality of principle or sentiment, but meant to create, and this is his quote, an expression of the American mind, to give voice to just the sort of inborn love of freedom that he has seen all around him, and that I think he certainly saw from the people he enslaved on the mountaintop, right? If you want to see the love of human freedom, look around at people who are held in human bondage. So that transcendence, I think Jefferson would have said, there's that love for these inalienable rights. Among these, right? What else besides life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? In all of human history, given voice to here in language that has an almost biblical cadence, right? It matters that it's stated, but I believe it also matters that it's stated so beautifully, so that the next great orator and writing statesman, Lincoln, can take it up with his immortal cadences and say that he has never had a thought that didn't stem from the Declaration of Independence, and calls it the electric cord that binds us all, past, present, and future. So that's the sentiment, but it's also the quality of expression. And thank heavens for John Adams, who sensed that on the page, Jefferson had the fluency to elevate in that way.
Oh, I'm so glad we're having this conversation in the lead up to America's 250. Okay, so tell us more about Thomas Jefferson. He was 33-year-old young man. What were the influences? What helped him get to this point? Is it classical education? Is it some other ideas? Is it exposure? Are there some particular great books? Are there mentors? I know George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights as an important part in this. How did this come about in the mind of this young man?
So Jefferson comes from a privileged family in a rough frontier place. I think we can overstate the extent to which the 56 signers are people of privilege. They are certainly in the in the wealthy upper middle of their status hierarchy, but they're not like billionaires who totally transcend the status of their world. So Jefferson comes from a privileged family on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a pretty rough place. His father has.
And by the way, at the time, that is the border, right?
That is the frontier.
That's as far west as they go.
that is the frontier. And, Jefferson comes from one of the largest libraries in Virginia in his home, which I think is less than 70 books at his birth and 200 by the time he goes off to college, at a time when large libraries in Massachusetts number 3,000 or 4,000 volumes. So he's an educated person. He values texts. That's what takes him from Albemarle County to William and Mary, where he reads law. Locke is obviously very important to him in the drafting of the Declaration. So is his fluency with the Republican thinkers from Greek and Roman times. The Scottish Enlightenment is important to him. His readings in law under George Wythe are important to him. We just got a wonderful letter from a second grader in Tustin, California, who wrote, as part of a school biography project, they each took a biographical assignment and then wrote as if they were writing to the person who they had studied. And Arit, our correspondent from Tustin, California, wrote and asked, "Was Mr. Wythe your favorite teacher?" I think thinking of his own favorite teacher, Mrs. Kelly. And Wythe was indeed one of his most important teachers. I think the atmosphere of Williamsburg, which was a sort of coffee house atmosphere, reading newspapers, which carried the latest news from London and France and Portugal. Jefferson was able to imagine himself as a citizen of the world and of the world of letters by the time he wrote this. But he had not traveled very far from his home place before he went to Philadelphia. So a lot of it is an inborn quality of mind that is just relentless and voracious. And then, of course, a commitment to this cause from pretty early on.
All right, take us into the room in the summer of 1776. Do we know what was on their minds? Did they have a sense of the stakes at that moment? I mean, just give us your perspective.
So the way we know what was on their minds is from letters that they wrote home. Historians always love it when families are separated. It's very sad for them, but it creates a record. If you think about the correspondence between John and Abigail Adams, which I think is one of the greatest marital correspondences in history, it dries up at times when John is home in Braintree. So the letters of the delegates to Congress, both to other political correspondents and to their families, are all digitized by the Library of Congress. If you Google letters to the delegates of Congress, you can read them all for yourself. We know that they were, especially the first time they gathered in 1774, pretty surprised at how different each of these mini republics were. So they've come together from places that are as distinct as France is from Spain and Spain is from Portugal, except for sharing the lingua franca of English, but they don't all speak it the same way. They're struck by each other's mores, right? Adams writes about how fancy the Virginians are, and some of the Virginians write about how plain and even how rude, ill-mannered the people from New England are, which I will say, as somebody who lived in New England for 31 years, is true. So they're remarkably distinctive. They represent places that have very different economies. If you think of Virginia, has 200,000 of the colonies, the rebellious colonies, 500,000 enslaved people live in Virginia. Massachusetts has something like 5,000 people in slavery, right? They have very different economies. They grow different things. They ship them different places. They read some of the same books. And if by 1776, something like 1 in 1,000 American men have been to college, college education is overrepresented in that room, in what we now call Independence Hall. So if you've been to college in the British American colonies, you've read a pretty similar digest of Enlightenment and classical readings, but you might have pretty different ideas of what they mean. And they have to do a nearly impossible thing by the Second Continental Congress, which is field an army out of nothing to fight the most powerful army and navy on the face of the earth with no allies, no overt funding coming from anywhere else. That takes up an awful lot of their time. If you read the minutes of Congress, just provisioning and making sure people have food and clothes in the army is very much top of mind currency, so that they can function. So it's a squabbling body. I think the musical 1776, which worked
Got to go
heavily
back and watch that now.
with it's playing in many places around the country now. Ford's Theater in DC, for DC listeners, has a terrific production. Stone and Edwards, the creators of that musical, read the letters of the delegates and the journals of Congress really intensively, and that sense of squabbling in a hot place in a city. Most of them are not city people. In the British America of 1776, less than 5% of people live in places that have 2,500 or more inhabitants. So being in a city of 30,000 plus people is distinctive to most of them. The flies, the heat, the doors, the need to preserve some secrecy if they're going to deliberate on something that is consequential. As a body that has sort of called itself into being as a supererogatory above your legislature's legislature, they have a need for secrecy, they have a need for comity, and they're very unlike each other. When we look back at that moment, I think it should give us hope that out of, incredible fractiousness and disunion can come common cause. Because I think nobody who looked at these folks and the polities they represented in 1765 or 1773 or even 1775 would have said, yeah, they're really going to get it together in 1776 and make a statement of common purpose, and then spend nearly 8 years after that making it true.
Well, I'm struck in what I've read now about the Congress after the 4th of July for years. I mean, poor Washington, I don't know how he continued to lead the rebellion, in that they squabbled constantly. Was there some kind of crisis that was forcing the action? How did it happen? How did it kind of finally come to a head and get acted upon? And was it a highly emotional moment for everybody there?
It's a highly emotional moment, right? It's a moment of great peril and risk. It's a moment where they know that as hard as they're working in Philadelphia, they're going to have to go home and face their constituencies, and they're going to have to explain what they have done. And unlike modern wars that people have consistently overpromised will be quick, right? Will be surgical, will be a blitzkrieg. They know that this isn't going to be quick or easy. When you think about the information circuit from Philadelphia to London and back, could never be shorter than 3 months and could easily be as long as 5 or 6, depending on weather. So even if they had some incredibly improbable victory, it would take 3 to 6 months for the Crown to respond and say, yeah, call off your dogs. So they know that they are in for a prolonged fight. And by the spring of 1776, parts of the country, the future country, the country that is created by that act, have been at war for nearly 13 months, right? April of 1775 in Lexington and Concord, and then moving sporadically in places down the eastern seaboard, people are already suffering with a lack of access to the finished goods, the manufactured goods that are the lifeline of a colonial place, right? You think about the supply chain disruptions that we all experienced in 2020 and early 2021 with COVID. Like, the supply chain has one link. It's Britain. And after the Boston Tea Party, right, with the intolerable or coercive acts, that supply chain is severed in many places and frayed almost every place else. So people are not getting the clothing they want. People are not getting books. I mean, people are not getting anything that the colonies can't make. Colonies can't make munitions. So it's a bold and perilous act to say, we've decided that Thomas Paine, which you all read, they have the confidence that much of the rebellious continent has either read or listened to Common Sense, which has made this argument for separation. Somehow we're going to get the job done. First, we're going to print money backed by nothing. Then we're going to try to get some allies who are going to throw in with us. Why?
Not because they believe in the document.
Maybe they'll believe in the document. They'll see that we've tested our mettle. They'll hate Britain so much that they will believe that we might win this thing. You asked at the beginning of my long ramble here, Kevin, what forced their hand? The Crown forced their hand. The Crown could have acted differently and forestalled this until, what was Canada's independence? 1961, right? The Crown could have said, we're going to let Boston go, or you have a point. You'll have a subordinate legislature like the Irish Parliament. Or even we're going to empower better ministers and see what they say, right? The Crown declared the colonies in rebellion before the colonies declared themselves one people, separate and equal.
Fascinating. Okay, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Did Jefferson grasp the extraordinary consequential nature of what he was writing and putting down and forth, and what it would do for humanity? Do you think he had a sense of that magnitude?
Retrospectively, he says yes, right? By the 1820s, he realizes the monumental nature of the Declaration and the ways that by then a generation and a half of Americans have used those words to claim rights for themselves. I think if you could interview the Jefferson of 1776, the utterance would have felt different, right? It is a statement not of the ideal polity, but of life in a state of nature, right? We have been endowed, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator. And then when people sort themselves into governments, they elect hierarchies, they impose boundaries on those rights in order to have the trappings of a political life. I think it was hard for a Jefferson to imagine in 1776, somebody's going to use this yesterday to claim rights for themselves in the political world of now. And in fact, people were already doing that formally, right? The first petitions in Massachusetts of enslaved and formerly enslaved Black people using the language of liberty that's floating around to say us too, come in the very late 1760s. There's a famous one in 1773. Almost as soon as the ink on the Declaration is dry, there are freedom suits using these words. There are women's rights organizers using these words. Abigail Adams is using a similar framework, not the Declaration yet, but the language of liberty when she writes her Remember the Ladies letter in March of 1776. So I think Jefferson believed in the American people, but probably could not have anticipated how widely into the populace this insurgency, this rights talk could spread. And I like to think that as a tinkerer, as a scientist, he was somebody who believed in tools, that he would have liked that he had given people a powerful tool, even if he was not ready to accept or enforce the rights claims that people made using it. By the 1820s, he knows where it's going. He has faith in generations in the future to resolve even the knottiest question of the day, the question of human slavery, the wolf by the ears, as he famously calls it many times in his correspondence, but especially in 1820 after the Missouri Compromise. And I think has every reason to know by the 1820s that the Declaration and its claims will be part of the transformation of public opinion that he says is necessary to ending American slavery. But did he think so in 1776? Probably not.
All right. Well, I got to follow up on that because that weighs, I think, heavily on people's minds even more than ever today as we continue to sort of think through and process this. In the Ken Burns documentary on the American Revolution, you have this great quote. I loved it where you said the ideas of, I think the language of liberty is leaky and contagious. And so if you're going to put out these unprecedented aspirations about liberty and human equality, there are going to be consequences, not just with the British government, but with humanity. How, any sense of how Jefferson and others, but Jefferson in particular, because he wrote the words, was able to rationalize in his mind the incredible contradiction of also enslaving lots of people at Monticello?
Over 610 people in the course of his lifetime, right? Men, women, and children. And so at Monticello, we reckon every day with our ordinary and therefore extraordinary American guests with somebody who is the greatest philosopher of liberty on the western side of the Atlantic, somebody who participates at scale in the institution of transatlantic slavery, and someone who knows that slavery is a profound moral evil. He says this in print in the Summary View of British Americans and Their Rights in 1774. He says it in a paragraph of the Declaration that is excised as Congress is adopting it, right? The culminating grievance was to be a broadside against King George for keeping open a market where men are bought and sold, for support of the transatlantic slave trade when colonists are desperate, Jefferson says, to end it. So I think he is fully aware of the contradiction of his life. And one of the things that we ask our visitors as they learn of that contradiction and reflect on it at Monticello is to think about the contradictions in their own lives, right? We are all fallen humans. We are all creatures of contradiction. Obviously, this is a profound moral contradiction. It's also something, and I take Jefferson at his words when he reflects on the institution of slavery. It is so deeply embedded in American life that it takes action that is equally visionary and equally foolhardy as writing the Declaration to imagine ending it. People do imagine ending it in his lifetime, right? People who are very close friends of his, Benjamin Rush, who is responsible for getting him back together with his frenemy, John Adams, becomes an ardent anti-slavery proponent. Jefferson is ardently anti-slavery, but does very little to make good on that claim. As one of my colleagues, Andrew Davenport, has said in a recent essay about Jefferson and youth at Monticello, it's fantastic to believe in the rising generation. It also kicks the can down the road. So I think he's aware of the contradiction, and he lives in a place that runs on chattel slavery, right? People in Virginia are extremely aware of the moral contradictions with which they live and are pretty ill-disposed to resolving them because their economy is so deeply invested in their human capital. So it's important that we look at this contradiction in Jefferson. It's important that we also look in the mirror and think, in what ways can I express greater ideals than I can live out? And then what do I do about that?
Well, actually, I think a lot of people talk about the Constitution, the Declaration, but in many ways, I think people increasingly say the ideals of the Declaration. How do we live out the ideals of the Declaration? I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Do you think as a country, are we still trying to live up to those ideals?
I think that it's like the more perfect phrase in the preamble of the Constitution. Those ideals are utopian and they are a goal. They are like the green light at the end of Gatsby's dock, right? It's important that we see it out there shining. It is important that we yearn towards it. Do I think that we will ever fully get there? I don't, because we are people, right? We are people, and one of the things that Congress knew in 1776 that I think we have forgotten at our peril as political and social actors is compromise is really hard. It's really important, even when you compromise with terrible things, because building coalitions and finding small places where we can move forward with people who have ideas that are very unlike ours is how a self-governing people advances. The preamble of the Declaration is perfection. I think it is important that we have perfection in mind. But do I think we will ever reach that destination? No. Do I think that we have made incredible strides in the last 249 years and 11 months? I sure do. Sometimes people ask me, because I'm as a historian, wouldn't you like to go back there for just hell no. Right? Like, do I want to drink their water? Do I want to have my husband own my wages, my body, my futurity, in all of its part? I do not. Do I want to walk through filth in the streets every day? No, ma'am. No, sir. I do believe that we've groped toward it, and that it's really important to have that beacon in front of us, which is one of the reasons that the Declaration and the fact that, as one of our most popular 250th products says here, our guy wrote it, is one of our big themes at Monticello for 2026.
Thank you. I just have to say, I think you're handling this exceptionally well. This is a very difficult subject, but you're doing this really thoughtfully and gracefully and forcefully, and we're all trying to come to grips with this as we celebrate America's 250th. All right, so now let's bring us to that spot in what was the Western frontier at Monticello. I was very fortunate. I grew up in Culpeper, just up the road along the Blue Ridge Mountains. Going to Monticello when I was a kid was a huge deal. It was just after the bicentennial. Why should somebody listening come to Monticello? Maybe they don't have to do it before July 4th. I'm sure you got a lot of visitors right now, but why should they come, and what should they expect?
Well, come before July 4th and come back, right? I think we are a site of inspiration, of honesty, and of discovery. And I think there is a lot of messaging right now in the United States and in the world, from both right and left, that says you can have honesty or you can have inspiration, but you have to choose, right? Broadly speaking, forces on the left will say you can only have honesty, and honesty is not inspiring. And forces on the right will say you can only have heroes for inspiration, and honesty cuts down your heroes. Monticello is a place that insists that in order to have inspiration, you must have honesty, and that to have honesty is inspiring. So it is a place where people regularly shed tears of joy in being together with people who are unlike themselves, and in talking about the Declaration of Independence. I have personally been on several tours this year where the guide has welcomed people to quote that preamble with her or with him. And people tear up thinking about what it means to be from that document. I have a colleague who says, because of the aspirations of Jefferson and the contradictions of Jefferson, everybody in America comes from Monticello in some way. So we want people to come to see where they're from. And then also, Kevin, you know, from having grown up here, it's extraordinarily, stunningly beautiful. Jefferson, to his peril, cited his plantation 900 vertical feet from sea level. That means that every crop that he sold, every crop that he grew had to be nourished with water that came from the bottom of a mountain. And every crop that he sold had to go on a riverine highway that was 900 vertical feet away. He did that because he wanted his home to be in a place of vision. Right out my window looking south, I can see for 60 miles. And so I think there is an experience here, the power of place, of the United States as a visionary nation, born of these ideals from imperfect people, ordinary people who made themselves extraordinary when their times called on them. And to visit us for an afternoon is to partake of that and think about what it asks of you. Jefferson was really insistent, as people came to venerate him later in life, that they look instead to themselves. And that's what we want, right? We want people to look to our founders, to know our founders, to see them eye to eye, but then to think of themselves as founders of this country in an ongoing way. I'll say one more thing. Jefferson's last great achievement, and the thing that he listed third on his tombstone, was the creation of the University of Virginia. That gesture was because he knew that a republic, in order to sustain, needed virtuous citizens, and virtuous citizens needed to have a common basis in education. We're a place that looks at what it means to be virtuous citizens, and where we share that education with hundreds of thousands of Americans and people from around the globe every year. So I will say, on the gloomiest day, on the day that has the thorniest personnel issues, right? All the things that somebody who's running a corporation with 400 employees and 100 volunteers faces. I look at that house, I look out that window, and I especially look at the Americans walking by, and I have joy in our past and hope for our future. That's why you should come.
Awesome. Well, I want to speak to a couple of those things that you brought up. First of all, I went on to the College of William and Mary, sort of following in Jefferson's footsteps, and we used to always joke there that he went on to create the University of Virginia to help those who couldn't help themselves. And that was our little dig. But when you go to Monticello, this is not a place like Washington, D.C., or there's a lot of marble statues. You really get a feeling for the place. And as you were talking about the different founders who came into the big city of Philadelphia, he was from the frontier. He chose that place. So, and I agree with you. I think it's some of the most beautiful geography in America, that area around Albemarle County. So kudos, encourage anybody listening. You got to go. You got to go spring, fall, summer, winter, anytime. And then, of course, the place itself is just remarkable when you get into the science of the guy and the experimentation and everything else. All right. I got to bring this to a close. By the way, had Robbie George on the Going Big podcast to speak to the virtue that informed people like Jefferson and the founders as well. So you're tying all this together really well. Here are my last two questions. First is, if Jefferson were to come back today, how do you think he would react to the world? Would he be stunned that 250 years later we're still guided by these ideals? What would he think about just the advancement of society, of technology, of everything? What would he think about artificial intelligence? I'm really putting you on the spot, but do you have any particular thoughts there?
So I don't have a crystal ball, right? But I can say Jefferson valued being on the cutting edge of everything, right? Agriculture, botany, cuisine, architecture. So I think he would have the same curiosity about the modern, postmodern, postmodern world, whatever we're in now. I think he would always be on the leading, if not the bleeding edge of what's going on in science and technology. I think any of the founders would be stunned that we still have in name a republic after 250 years, right? One of the things that they all studied about Republican forms of governments is that they can't stretch in geography and they can't last in time. The only examples the world had ever known were small and short-lived. That we have gained strength from our incredible geographic advantages and expanded boundaries and the infusion of new people from around the world. And that's something that Jefferson early articulated and profoundly believed in, was the idea of America as an asylum for liberty-seeking people from around the world. I think that would be remarkable for anybody who was not only in the room where it happened in 1776, but anywhere on the continent.
All right. To close this out on the Going Big podcast, I mean, you're right. Empires have come and gone, even since 1776.
Sure.
Revolutions have happened. There's just nothing like this. I look back at the bicentennial 50 years ago. It seemed like the country came together at that moment. What would you hope from a going big standpoint into the future, that people who come to Monticello, people who celebrate the 250th, people who really dig in to study Jefferson and the other founders, what would you hope they take away in a way that affects our futures?
So I'm guessing from the color of your hair, which is the color of mine, that you remember the bicentennial. As
I do indeed.
I was 13.
I was 12. We're close.
We're close. You're the last year of the baby boom. I'm the second to last year of the baby boom then. Anniversaries make memories, and people should think about, whether you want to or not, right? Whether you care about this anniversary, and obviously Monticello has invested enormously in caring about it. Whether you care about it or whether you don't, people will remember where they were in 2026 at the 250th. So think about the memory that you want to make, the baton pass that you want to offer to the person who's young enough that they'll get another crack at this in 2076, which I'm guessing Silicon Valley's promises notwithstanding, I will not. The second thing, which goes with the first, is this is a patriotic occasion, and patriotism means many things. Find yours. Right? Whether it's the UFC fight on the White House lawn, or whether it's a parade in your hometown, or whether it is the kind of what de Tocqueville called reflective patriotism, which is what Monticello embraces, the patriotism that affiliates by critiquing and by replicating the elbows and corners that were in the room in Independence Hall in 1776. Think about what belonging to the nation means to you and act on it, because otherwise somebody else will define your patriotism.
Oh, thank you. Well, anybody listening, you go to Washington, go to Philadelphia, go to your local parade, as Dr. Kamensky says, go to Monticello sometime. You got to. Trust me, it's definitely on everybody's bucket list in the world. Dr. Jane Kamensky, thank you so much. Can't wait to the 4th of July of 2026. And thank you so much for joining us on the Going Big podcast.
Of course, the anniversary is just a beginning again.
Well said. All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Going Big podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling energized and ready to tackle your biggest goals. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps spread the word, and it gets these inspiring stories out to more people. You can also find more content, resources, and updates at our website, goingbigpodcast.com. Remember, the only limits are the ones you don't challenge, the limits that you impose on yourself. Keep pushing, keep growing, and above all, keep going big. See you next time on the Going Big podcast.